स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतंगमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। Let us bow down to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of all religions, Supreme God incarnate, and pray to Him to remove all our ignorance, to take us nearer and nearer to Him. Let us pray to Him for peace and happiness. Sri Ramakrishna was talking to Pandit Shashadhar, a great scholar, a sincere, honest person. Sri Ramakrishna was highly impressed by him. So, his grace just flowed on him. He gave spiritual instructions to make his life blessed. If Sri Ramakrishna had not talked with him, he would have remained a dry academic scholar. People are just satisfied with their academic interests. They don't want to go deep into the subject matter. But Sri Ramakrishna's visit to Pandit Shashadhar transformed his life overnight. A dry scholar became a great devotee. A jnani became a bhakta. For the first time, Pandit Shashadhar was enjoying the taste of bhakti, devotion. He could see in Sri Ramakrishna how, through his eyes, through his words, through his actions, love was pouring forth. People would be flooded in the waters of his love. Sri Ramakrishna's love overwhelmed them. It is just like the touch of the philosopher's stone. The iron becomes golden. It was just like that. Whoever came in contact with Sri Ramakrishna became really blessed. In one visit he could understand the importance of the practice of spiritual discipline. And Sri Ramakrishna tells very emphatically, spiritual life is based on spiritual discipline. We have to bear this all the time. Why we give way to anger? Why we give way to jealousy and hatred? That means we are not very strict about practicing our discipline. We are just pulled down again and again by these bad tendencies tormenting our heart all the time. What is spiritual life? It is fighting these bad tendencies and turning towards God. So, Sri Ramakrishna made Shashidhar very clear that thenceforward he should stop giving any kind of intellectual discourses anymore, but just simply step into spiritual practices. And Pandit Shashidhar took all Sri Ramakrishna's teachings very seriously. So, one of the most important spiritual discipline which Sri Ramakrishna has emphasized is prayer. We are so negligent. We are so careless about prayers. We don't pray wholeheartedly. We sit, our mind will be dancing somewhere. We come and sit in the prayer out of some compulsion, as it were, not wholeheartedly. If you do it wholeheartedly, you will see wonder of wonders in your life. You will be completely transformed. You will no more be old being. You will be reshaped. So, from this point of view, prayer has a very important role in shaping your spiritual life properly. It helps you to establish well in purity. It enhances your spiritual progress. That's why, according to our spiritual culture, spiritual traditions, anything what you do must start with prayer. Anything that you conclude must be with prayer. Beginning and end must be properly looked into. Then it becomes literally an offering to God. So, prayer represents the first stage in the aspirant's struggle for higher consciousness. Do you want to be really spiritual? Then be sincere in your prayer. We are advised to pray for others in order to free ourselves from thoughts of hatred, thoughts of jealousy, and selfishness, which are inimical to our spiritual progress. As long as these are there in our mind, how can we ever even think of spiritual progress? So prayer in this sense is only a way of purifying oneself by sending good thoughts to others. Since all individual minds are parts of the cosmic mind, this kind of prayerful thinking may help others. A sage sitting in the cave, in the dense forest, can work for the betterment of the whole universe through his prayers. And the whole world is getting on well in spite of all violence and all sorts of anti-spiritual thinking. Still the world is marching onwards on account of the prayers of the saints and sages sitting in meditation in the early hours of morning and evening. So one may thus render service to others in silence, a form of mental karma yoga. Any activity is called karma. It is not that only when you do it by your hands externally, then only it is called karma. It is not like that. Anything, any activity is called karma. Thinking is also a karma. All the great religions of the world teach prayer. And prayer has got very important place. Lord Christ prayed long hours and taught his followers to watch and pray. If only we could follow his teachings, the world would be heaven. But we are diabolical. We hear, but we won't act. We are not practical. We think one way, act another way. In Sanskrit it is called mithyachara. That means hypocrisy. That's why we are as we are. Not an inch moved forward on account of this hypocrisy. If you are sincere, you will see how you will be moving fast towards perfection. All the saints all over the world have given great significance for the prayer. Saint Paul tells to pray without ceasing. In India there was a great saint, his name Tyagraj. His whole life was spent in singing and singing and singing and singing. Morning, afternoon, night, evening, whole day. Shedding tears of joy. Sankirtan. Saint Teresa of Avila teaches that prayer is the only door to those mystical grace that the Lord bestows upon the soul. Sri Ramakrishna prescribes prayer as a spiritual discipline. If you want to have a spiritual format, it should start with prayer. We come with spiritual aspiration, but we are so careless. We give some reason. I slept night at 2 o'clock. I could not get up in the morning. So what? Who is loser? That reason, what's the use of giving the reason? That day is gone without prayer. That's all. That's the hard fact. Whether you have slept, whether you have not slept, whether you are restless, whether you are peaceful, they are all secondary. Did you do prayer? No. Get out. Day is gone in vain. That is the import of discipline. Why should there be discipline? Otherwise, you can't fight the bad tendencies which are so strong in the mind. Once a devotee asked Sri Ramakrishna, "Sir, what is the way? We are all in the world." Sri Ramakrishna immediately said, "Prayer and the holy company. Earnest prayer is to be done. Since God is our very own." He said to Master Mahasaya, "One should pray to God with a longing heart. God certainly listens to our prayers if it is sincere." These are the words of Sri Ramakrishna. Not an imaginary figure who lived in this world like us, who suffered like us, who sacrificed everything for the sake of humanity, who had seen God, talked with God. He is telling this. God listens to your prayer. What more authenticity you want? Why should you have any more doubts regarding prayer anymore? Still, if the doubt persists, it only means our mind is crooked. Crookedness must be straightened out. What Sri Ramakrishna meant was that through sincere prayer, everyone could overcome one's inherent limitations and gain spiritual experience by God's grace. When you start to pray, you become the recipient of God's grace. Holy Mother also emphasizes the importance of prayer very much in her teachings. Swami Brahmananda ji, one of the foremost disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, and Swami Chidananda ji, they all teach constant prayer to God as an important spiritual practice. That itself is a discipline. Doing prayer constantly, morning and evening, without giving any reason, that is discipline. In Sanskrit we call it prarthana. It means petitionary prayer, asking God for help to free oneself from the hold of the senses and turn away from the darkness of ignorance to the light of truth. It is the first stage in the struggle for higher consciousness, in which the aspirant, realizing his limitations, opens his heart to divine power and light. So, it is in effect a movement from God to the soul. Worship, the spiritual masters ask us to devote some time in worship. If not external, do it mental. It is very important. They don't say for nothing. It has got immense value. Understand it, practice it. Worship, what does worship do? It shifts the focus of the aspirant's activities from the ego to the divine and detaches the soul from external objects. It is primarily a movement from soul to God. Worship is a movement from the soul to God. One movement is from God to the soul. The other movement is from soul to the God. As a result of these two movements, what happens? The soul, the individual being, draws closer to God. This act of approaching God, the Divine Supreme, is what dhyana or meditation means. In Vedantic term, it is called upasana. It means sitting near God. Upasana, sitting near God. So, prayer, worship and meditation represent 3 degrees of development of closeness between the soul and God. One begins a spiritual life by asking God for favors. Then starts offering things to Him, and finally succeeds in going nearer to Him. These 3 steps also represent 3 stages in the progressive transformation of the aspirant's consciousness. People have all sorts of wrong notions about prayer. I mean, people who have no sense of understanding properly, who have got the habit of making unnecessary observations. They think that prayer would reduce them to the position of a beggar, which is beneath their dignity. When people talk that way, it only means ignorance and egoism lie at the root of such thinking. In begging, there is no relationship between the beggar and the begged. But spiritual prayer is addressed not to a total stranger, but to a being who is the soul of one's soul, the ruler of the universe, one's eternal and inseparable beloved. When a child expresses his needs, his parents do not think it to be begging. They only give him what really belongs to him. Similarly, prayer is only a way of preparing ourselves to receive what is really ours by divine right. When a student approaches a teacher for instruction, it is not considered begging. Prayer is only seeking guidance from the eternal Guru, the teacher of all teachers. So, prayer is the soul's dialogue with God. So all our spiritual activities should start with prayer. Praying wholeheartedly. We come into the force of spiritual attraction. We are now terribly attracted by the world. We are in this gravitational force. But prayer, worship and meditation, these disciplines will rise you up, will push you upwards, will throw you upwards, will release you from this world's gravitational force, and you become attracted towards spiritual force. You are drawn towards it. Once you get into that spiritual attraction, then you are free from the danger of worldly pulls anymore. So, do you want spiritual life? First question. Are you sincere? Second question. Then practice it with all earnestness. Crush your ego. Crush your all bad propensities. People when start When they start taking spiritual life, just like babies, how they look so pretty. Yesterday I saw one child. It was so beautiful. I was keep on looking at the child. Just 1 month old child. So pretty. But as it grows in a different way. There is no more guilelessness. It is exposed to worldly things and worldly ways. In the same way, if you are not very alert and watchful, you meet with spiritual accident, as I had told in my previous classes. A person who becomes egoistic in the name of spirituality is worse than the man who is egoistic in the world. That only shows you are far away from spiritual life. Far, far away. Never say, I am a human being. I have got this weakness. I am like this. I am like that. What is the use of telling all these things? Everybody knows it. That's why you are in the world. That's why you have come to spiritual life. Otherwise, why should you come to spiritual life? If that is not so, you have come to spiritual life only to transform yourself. Struggle. Struggle wholeheartedly. Die in the attempt. Doesn't matter. It's a heroic death. Never yield to your bad nature anymore. Don't have any revengeful attitude. Let not the seeds of jealousy and hatred grow in your spiritual heart. Burn them so that they may not sprout at all. How to do it? By constant prayer, by humbleness, by watchfulness, by worship and devotion to Guru. Very important. Once you lose devotion to Guru, your spirituality becomes zero. No spirituality without devotion to Guru. With these words I conclude my talk, and now I shall read some passage in the Gospel. Page 492. Gauri Pandit practiced austerity. When he chanted a hymn to the Divine Mother, the other Pandits would seem no more than earthworms. Narayan Shastri was not merely a scholar either. He practiced sadhana as well. He studied for 25 years without a break. Nyaya alone he studied for 7 years. Still he would go into ecstasy while repeating the name of Shiva. The king of Jaipur wanted to make him his court pandit, but Narayan refused. He used to spend much time here. That means Sri Ramakrishna is telling. Here means with him. He had a great desire to go to the Vasishtha ashrama to practice tapasya. Vasishtha ashrama is in Himalayas. He often spoke to me about it, but I forbade him to go there. At that he said, "Who knows when I shall die? When shall I practice sadhana? Any day I may crack." After much insistence on his part, I let him go. Some say that he is dead. that he died while practicing austerity. Others say that he is still alive and that they saw him off on a railway train. Before meeting Keshav, I asked Narayan Shastri to visit him and tell me what he thought of him. Narayan reported that Keshav was an adept in japa. He knew astrology and remarked that Keshav had been born under a good star. Then I went to visit Keshav in the garden house at Bulgaria. Hriday was with me. The moment I saw Keshav, I said, of all the people I see here, he alone has dropped his tail. He can now live on land as well as in water like a frog. Keshav sent 3 members of the Brahma Samaj to the temple garden at Dakshineshwar to test me. Prasanna was one of them. They were commissioned to watch me day and night and to report to Keshav. They were in my room and intended to spend the night there. They constantly uttered the word Dayamaya, the compassionate one. The Brahmos are fond of using this name for God, whom they believe to be formless and yet personal and endowed with attributes. They constantly uttered the word Dayamaya and said to me, follow Keshav Babu, that will do you good. I said, I believe in God with form. Still they went on with their exclamation of Dayamaya. Then a strange mood came over me. I said to them, get out of here. I didn't allow them to spend the night in my room. So they slept on the veranda. Captain also spent the night in the temple garden, the first time he visited me. Michael Masudan Dutt, a lawyer and one of the greatest of Bengali poets, he was a convert to Christianity. He visited the temple garden when Narayan Shastri was living with me. Dwarika Babu, Mathur's eldest son, brought him here. The owners of the temple garden were about to get into a lawsuit with the English proprietors of the neighboring powder magazine. So they wanted Michael's advice. I met him in the big room next to the manager's office. Narayan Shastri was with me. I asked Narayan to talk to him. Michael couldn't talk very well in Sanskrit. He made mistakes. Then they talked in the popular dialect. Narayan Shastri asked him his reason for giving up the Hindu religion. Pointing to his stomach, Michael said, it was for this. Narayan said, what shall I say to a man who gives up his religion for his belly's sake? Thereupon Michael asked me to say something. I said, I don't know why, but I don't feel like saying anything. Someone seems to be pressing my tongue. Manomohan said, Mr. Chaudhary will not come. He said, that fellow Shashidhar from Faridpur will be there. I shall not go. Mr. Chaudhary had obtained his master's degree from Calcutta University. He drew a salary of 300 or 400 rupees. After the death of his first wife, he had felt intense dispassion for the world. But after some time, he had married again. He frequently visited the master at the temple garden. Master said, "How mean of him. He is vain of his scholarship. Besides, he has married a second time. He looks on the world as a mere mud puddle." To the devotees, this attachment to lust and gold makes a man small-minded. When I first saw Harmohan, he had many good traits. I longed to see him. He was then 17 or 18 years old. I used to send for him every now and then, but he wouldn't come. He is now living away from the family with his wife. He had been living with his uncle before. That was very good. He had no worldly troubles. Now he has a separate home and does the marketing for his wife daily. The other day he came to Dakshineshwar. I said to him, "Go away. Leave this place. I don't even feel like touching you." Sri Ramakrishna went to the inner apartments to see the deity. He offered some flowers. The ladies of Balram's family were pleased to see him. The master came back to the drawing room and said, "The worldly minded practice devotions, japa and austerity only by fits and starts. But those who know nothing else but God repeat His name with every breath. Some always repeat mentally, Om Rama. Even the followers of the path of knowledge repeat Soham, I am He. There are others whose tongues are always moving, repeating the name of God. One should remember and think of God constantly." Pandit Shashadhar entered the room with one or two friends and saluted the master. Master said smilingly, "We are like the bridesmaids waiting near the bed for the arrival of the groom." The Pandit laughed. The room was filled with devotees, among them Dr. Pratap and Balram's father. The master continued his talk. Master said to Shashadhar, the first sign of knowledge is a peaceful nature. And the second is absence of egoism. You have both. There are other indications of a jnani. He shows intense dispassion in the presence of a sadhu, is a lion when at work, for instance, when he lectures, is a lion when at work, for instance, when he lectures and is full of wit before his wife. But the nature of the Vijnani is quite different, as was the case with Chaitanya Deva. He acts like a child or a madman or an inert thing or a ghoul. While in the mood of a child, he sometimes shows childlike guilelessness, sometimes the frivolity of adolescence, and sometimes, while instructing others, the strength of a young man. Pandit Shashadhar asked a question, by what kind of bhakti does one realize God? Master said, 3 kinds of bhakti are found according to the nature of the man: sattvic bhakti, rajasic bhakti and tamasic bhakti. We shall stop here. Now, discussion session. Yes. A person who feels identified with his ego becomes irritated. Feeling oneself very important person, that is egoistic attitude. When you come to spiritual life, you must always reduce yourself to nothing. That should be your target. Even if there is reasons for showing temper, you should try to contain it. That is the discipline. If a person shows anger, then what's the difference between a person in the world and a person in the spiritual life? Nothing extraordinary. But even if there are reasons to show anger, if you don't show up, then you're really great. That merit is given by God, not by human beings. You are directly evaluated by God Himself, not by anybody else. But you have to watch yourself properly before acting, before talking, before doing anything. It's a different matter when the Guru tells something. The relationship between the Guru and the disciple is entirely different. If you consider that relationship as ordinary relationship, then your spirituality is destroyed. If you consider Guru as your own person who is concerned about your welfare, then you should not have any kind of disrespect. Even a trace of disrespect should not be there in the mind. So you have to guard yourself, how you are to maintain that respectability. It's not that the Guru would become egoistic. No. It's not that way. When you are learning, you have to be most humble. Then you will receive the maximum. So that is the way, particularly in spiritual life. In ancient times, not very ancient, I would say in my lifetime, 30 years, 40 years back, that is my lifetime. In 30 years, 40 years back, I have seen great spiritual teachers. When aspirants come for guidance, they don't immediately take the student and put him on the pedestal and give him a seat and they throne him and make him a big teacher so that he can also talk and guide people. No. What kind of guidance he can give? Blind leading the blind. So what the teacher would do, he would ask him to just do the job, do the work properly. The man's inner nature is tested, how he works. All his angularities become exposed. It's good. One has to get purified. Karma is necessarily meant for purification. You have to churn yourself thoroughly before you can turn yourself to God. Churning, the karma takes that. It allows you to churn yourself thoroughly. Churning, churning, churning. By churning only nectar comes. Churning of ocean, nectar came. Of course, first poison came. Next came nectar. So, how you do work? Not a haphazard way. in a flimsy way, in a half-hearted way. What kind of work is? Better not do any work at all. Go and sleep instead of showing that sluggishness in the work. If you are not doing work properly, it means either you are sick or you are not fit for the work. That means how can you become qualified for higher spiritual life? A person who cannot even broom, who cannot even vacuum properly, how can you expect him to think of God? Simply will be sitting on the chair and dozing, not meditating. He may be closing his eyes, but inside he will be thinking of devil, not God. What is the devil? The devil of egoism, devil of jealousy, hatred, anger. All this rubbish things he will be thinking while closing the eyes, sitting in the chapel. You want that person to improve spiritually. Spiritual life has not started at all to such a person. That's my valuation. You have to prepare yourself thoroughly well. Then you will see how you will shine in all glory. That's the way. You must read the direct disciples' life. Sri Ramakrishna's disciples. How the spiritual aspirants would come for their guidance. Do you know how severely they would scold them? So they know how to make them all right. The scolding are like shock treatments. You must know that. Certain types of wounds are to be treated by shock treatments. Ordinary drugs will not work there. So, Guru only knows what's to be done. So as long as you are a student, a disciple, an aspirant, be aware of that status. Don't jump yourself to be yourself a teacher. Just because you happen to be here for a month or so, you pose yourself as a big teacher. Now, build up your personality. Love and compassion. Speaking politely, not using harsh words. If you open your tongue, how rough and tough talking. Why should you talk that way? Even if you hurt yourself, doesn't matter. It's good for you from spiritual point of view. To that extent, your ego is little bit cut. Let it be cut thoroughly. Let it die, bleeding. I appreciate that.